Welkom bij Business Radio vanop FTI SuperNova in de Wagenaars hier in Antwerpen. Ik ben Peter van Oostende en ik praat zo dadelijk met een absolute tech-expert, Greg Williams. Hij is hoofdredacteur van Wired, het Amerikaanse en Britse magazine dat zich voornamelijk buigt over belangrijke vraagstukken met betrekking tot technologie en innovatie. A warm welcome, Greg. As the editor-in-chief of Wired, you have a unique vantage point on emerging technologies. Which innovations do you believe are currently shaping our future?
That's a really big question. And I think that the way I would answer that is to think about the fact that I think technologies are impacting each other. So I don't think there's a single technology at the moment that's really sort of changing the game, although I think you could make an argument that AI, which we might talk about later, is certainly transformational or will be transformational. But I think that what you can say is that technology is now ubiquitous. It's in every aspect of our lives. It's changed numerous industries. It will change more. And I think that over the next few years, we are going to see sort of it really impacting the human body in ways we haven't seen it a lot in before. I think we're going to see areas like biotechnology, areas like genomics. We're going to see the work that's being done in places like Google DeepMind around protein folding. So I think we're really looking at the way that technology is not just sort of, should we say, sort of like transforming business, but it's transforming pretty much every aspect of our lives, and sometimes in ways that we don't really even notice. I mean, I think that a great example of that would be something like the smartphone. You know, my phone today, I woke up and I communicated with my office. I used it to navigate to get here. Last night, I used it to order food.
Right.
I had my tickets on it for my Eurostar travel back to London.
Sure.
I would be completely lost without it, but I'm now so used to that experience, whereas maybe even 5 years ago, I wouldn't have trusted that experience. So I think there's a lot of areas around that we can kind of explore maybe.
Sure. Let's briefly discuss some departments where new technology rapidly takes down walls and rolls out new possibilities. For instance, with the rapid expansion of the Internet of Things, how do you see IoT changing everyday life for the average person in the next decade?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, because I think the IoT, we've had a lot of promise around that for a long time. Mm-hmm. I think that we've seen a lot of use cases that maybe aren't particularly helpful. So I remember the big one for a while is that every hardware manufacturer was talking about the connected fridge, right? So we'd all walk up to our fridges, we'd be able to see what was inside, it would suggest recipes. But of course, there has to be a use case. There has to be some necessity, some need for it.
Right.
And I think the IoT will be sort of impactful, but we're not quite there in terms of finding the right use cases. So I think having kind of, connected homes and security systems, what's interesting about that for me is that we take technology away from the screen, right? So the technology becomes something that is, we don't necessarily interface with it with our fingers, we interface with it with our voices and with our eyes, I think, increasingly in the future.
Right. Sustainability is another critical issue. How are emerging technologies addressing environmental concerns? And does Wired play a role in highlighting sustainable innovations? Is that a big focus at Wired?
Yeah, it's a real focus for us. I mean, I think that sustainability is one of those really big issues that absolutely no organization can not be engaged with at the moment. We're looking at all the science is showing us that we are not even going to get close to sticking to the 1.5 target that we hoped. Looks like we're definitely going to cruise past 2 degrees warming. There's a very good chance a lot of climate scientists were getting to 3. I think that every organization needs to have it on its radar. Why would we tell a lot of stories about that, whether that's around climate finance and the way that we can think about sort of funding, new funding models for, to move a lot of capital out of kind of carbon, or whether it's highlighting entrepreneurs that are doing amazing things, whether that might be packaging or that might be some form of software that allows organizations to have end-to-end decarbonization throughout their supply chains.
Right.
So lots of great stories there.
Okay. Something completely different. Sweden recently announced that all schools will remove their digital technology from classrooms, and this because they determined that students were performing worse than ever. Should schools become as dependent on technology as in the other cornerstones of our society?
That's a really good question. So I know that there's a lot of people that say that phones should be banned from schools, that technology just distracts children, that it makes their attention spans shorter. I'm not sure that we've seen any real compelling piece of research that suggests that sort of smartphones are damaging to children's attention spans. I certainly would agree that social media is damaging to children, and I think that they're seeing images that they definitely shouldn't be seeing, and they're getting messaging from those platforms that is not appropriate for them. But in terms of the educational use, I think technology is really useful. I think it can be immersive. I recently went and had a demonstration of the Apple Vision Pro, not may I say by Apple, but actually a content maker, and he's thinking about how he can build educational tools around it. And it was amazing. It brought this. I was wandering around a space station, and I was able to sort of interact with various parts of it. I was able to sort of interact with parts of the universe, and I do think those kinds of really immersive technologies will be great for children moving forward. But I understand the challenges around it, and also fundamentally the challenges for parents. Anyone with a child who's interacting with technology, you have to, I guess, decide what's right for you and what's right for your family.
Exactly. You've touched upon the idea of hardware becoming as influential and dynamic as software once was. Could you elaborate on this shift and its implication for tech developers and even consumers?
Yeah, I should say that I feel that maybe I was kind of getting a little bit ahead of myself when I said that. But what I would say is that I do think that, software is really easy to replicate. There's a marginal cost in replicating software. Hardware is more expensive. There's lots of R&D times. There's long cycles. But I also feel that we're seeing sort of like some really interesting pieces of hardware that truly are transformational. I recently saw a presentation by the designer Yves Bahar about a cradle, a bassinet. I'm not quite sure of the right word. Hopefully that makes sense. And they were working with all kinds of scientists to ensure that when children are put in this device, but not a device, it's a beautiful, it looks like a beautiful bed for a baby. It calms them, it keeps them right temperature. It ensures that if they wake up and they start crying, it gets them back to sleep. It rocks very gently, and it makes a noise. It's an incredible, I think it's called the Snoo, something like that.
Okay.
But also, really, really importantly, they've had no cases of infant mortality, anyone who's used that device. So, this is still, I think 3,500 babies die in the United States every year from sudden infant death syndrome.
Right.
So if we can use technology to solve a problem like that, a piece of hardware like that,
Interesting.
that could have a real kind of effect on the world.
Let me quote you when I say that traditional business models are failing in today's tech landscape. What advice would you give to businesses trying to adapt?
I think it's really, really hard, right? If you're a large incumbent, you've got these huge IT stacks. You've had them for a long time. You're trying to maintain them while you're trying to sort of think about, okay, how do we move to the cloud? Or how do we move these days? Everyone's talking about the transition to green cloud. How do we ensure, because we've committed to getting to sort of net zero by 2030, we have to make sure that everything that we're doing is net zero if we can. So I think it's really, really hard for organizations to move quickly. What I do think they can do in terms of, if we're talking specifically about sort of like financial models, is I do think that they can encourage teams to work in different ways, smaller teams that are more autonomous. I think that they can think about ways in which they can bring in outside expertise and empower them so that they get a different mentality, a different mindset within their organization.
Makes sense.
I do think they can set up labs that are trying to sort of think about how they can create products that are competing against maybe the products and services that the company itself is building, almost like a kind of like a red team, red tagging team. So I think there's different ways the companies can think about it, but most importantly, I think that they need to all admit that, maybe the way that they've been doing business as usual might not be the way they'll be doing business in 5 years.
All right. How do you view the role of large corporations versus startups in driving forward world-changing technologies? Do you see a shift in who will lead the next wave of innovation?
I think large organizations are hugely important. I think sometimes the press gets very excited about startups. Startups is kind of very sexy, and obviously we can see people making money when they manage to sort of have a successful business that they're launching. But I think if we're talking about sort of, I think the question was around sort of sustainability and the way that we transition. Large organizations that are buying huge, that have huge supply chains, that are buying huge amounts of IT equipment, that are putting lots of people on planes, that are thinking about how they use resources, that have R&D budgets to develop new materials, R&D budgets or investments where they can divest from fossil fuels. I mean, that's where the capital is. And as much as I think that we like to get very excited about, VCs and startups, like actually where the capital is mostly is in very, very large organizations with huge kind of numbers of people and huge assets.
Exactly. We're going to take a quick break. We gaan er heel even uit. Zo dadelijk meer inzichten met Greg Williams, hoofdredacteur van Wired. En dan hebben we het ook over AI. We zijn zo bij je terug.
Business Radio, live from FTI SuperNova. Life's a venture.
Welkom terug. U luistert of kijkt nog steeds naar Business Radio. Van op locatie, meer bepaald op het geweldige SuperNova-event hier in de Waagnatie in Antwerpen. Ik praat verder met tech- en innovatie-expert Greg Williams, editor-in-chief bij Wired. Greg, there's no escape. We have to discuss artificial intelligence. In your view, what are the most exciting AI developments right now, and how are they reshaping industries?
Wow, yeah, another big question, Peter. Obviously, we have to talk about AI. I would say the mood has shifted in AI in the last year or so. I think it's gone from that kind of speculative period where a lot of people were sort of thinking about how they might start experimenting it to a deployment stage. So there was one survey that I saw that came out after Davos, and I think that around 30% of senior leaders now said that they had actual real-world applications they're using within their businesses, which I think is really interesting because almost no technology has had that quick an effect on businesses. This is like within a year or so. I think we're in the early sort of stages of large language models. I think there's going to be some interesting shifts that we see over the next year or so. There's lawsuits, obviously, and there's all kinds of competition going on between all the major players. But I think that this is a really, really meaningful shift. And I think that, we are beginning to sort of like see new kinds of operations, new kinds of functions within businesses, new kinds of roles.
Rightfully so. Which AI developments do you think will be most transformative for society? And how should we address the ethical considerations they bring?
Yeah, there's huge ethical considerations, obviously, and I think we're already sort of like looking at the challenges around, in an election year in many countries. We're looking at the challenges around misinformation, disinformation. We're looking at the pollution, obviously, of the information sphere. These deep fakes that we're seeing. We've seen one of Biden. There was one of the leader of the opposition in the UK, Keir Starmer, recently.
Sure.
These are really, really worrying. And I think that, platforms can act and they need to act. So I think this is important wherever we are. There's Indian election coming up, Mexican election coming up. So it's really important that these things are addressed. I think the ethical considerations more generally, I think that, there's a spectrum of people. There are the people who are very, very sort of, hands off and they just want to see where this goes. And then there's the people at the other end who have deep expertise, like Mustafa Suleiman, who's one of the co-founders of DeepMind, who is really worried, who's saying that we really do need to get the guardrails in place and we need to ensure that, we can't have, he talked about, these kind of killer robots, but they won't look like killer robots. They'll be tiny little flies that will be able to sort of deliver a lethal injection to people. He said this isn't coming soon, but this could be coming in 30, 40, 50 years. So I think that we need to learn the lessons of Web 2.0, where we let things get out of control. And we need to, in my view, regulate. And I think that the EU regulation, the AI Act that the EU is bringing in is actually a very, very good first step.
Okay, well, let's briefly discuss robotics. Considering the advancements in that field, where do you see human-robot collaboration heading? And what industries do you think will be most transformed by this partnership?
Yeah, I think manufacturing is the obvious one. We already see that in the automotive industry. I think we're going to start seeing sort of robots in places maybe where we didn't see them in the past. And I'm talking specifically, when we say robots, I'm talking about something that is, is mobile, maybe doesn't have a human form, maybe looks more like, a vacuum cleaner or something, but is moving around us. And there's been all kinds of research done where human beings, when they first see these pieces of technology, they become sort of slightly thrown by them, or they want to take photos of them. But the more they're around them, the less they notice them. So I think we're going to see them in areas like healthcare. I saw a demonstration recently of a robot, which is basically an AI, but with a lovely interface, that was being used to help people, elderly people who live on the road, who suffer from loneliness.
Okay.
So I think we're going to see these kinds of introductions of these devices, I won't even call them robots, into our world. Medical industry, manufacturing, I think will be impacted. And I think we'll see areas like supply chains. I think we'll see autonomous boats, autonomous vehicles eventually, although we've been promised them for a long time. But I think these things are all coming.
Okay, thank you for that. From wearable tech to smart home devices, consumer technology is evolving rapidly too. What trends should consumers be most excited about in the coming years?
Wow, you see, I'm not the gadget guy. I really don't know a huge amount about actual kind of physical products. But what I would say is that what we're seeing is a lot of new products that are built using sort of sustainable materials.
We could use a vest right here that would actually cool us down right now because it's smoking hot in here, you know?
It's very, very hot. We could use some kind of air conditioning unit if anyone has one to send over. I think that, sustainable materials is going to be a big trend in design. I think that we're seeing sort of like lots of kind of wearables and those kinds of technologies. People are really into tracking their health. But I think increasingly, we will begin to see the rise of goggles. I don't know how to describe them, but sort of some kind of interface that we have on our eyes. I think generally it'll be mixed reality rather than virtual reality. We're at the very early stages of this. There's still not yet a compelling consumer product that's come out into the marketplace.
Right.
But it will come. It will come.
It will come. There's a growing discussion about the decentralization of power through technologies like blockchain, for instance. What are your thoughts on how such technologies could reshape global economies or even governance?
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting question. I mean, I think we're seeing a sort of a move towards decentralization within some kind of marketplaces. We're definitely seeing a decentralization when it comes to, say, for instance, energy production. Where I think that, in the past, there's been these centers of energy production, mainly, obviously, in the 20th century in the Middle East and the United States. We're going to start seeing a lot of places that are energy independent, and that changes the way that, those kind of sovereign states operate. And we're going to start seeing, I think, a decentralized sort of, the internet is becoming more and more decentralized. There's almost kind of different internets that are growing up. There's kind of like a Brussels version, there's a DC version, there's a kind of a West Coast version. There's definitely, we're looking at, say, for instance, in India, they've passed all kinds of acts. What specifically I'm talking about an act where companies have to store their data within the sort of sovereign state of India. You can't have a server outside of India. So we're beginning to see that kind of decentralization.
Okay, last question. Looking ahead, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing humanity, and which emerging technologies or corporate strategies offer the most promising solutions?
For me, it's climate, and I think inequality as well. I think we're seeing enormous wealth inequality in Western states, and I think that's certainly leads to all kinds of challenges around populism. But I think really it's climate, and I think that all technologists, all business people, everyone working in policy and government, there should be kind of like a global effort to really address this in a meaningful way. Whether we need to just, it's a very complex challenge. So we need every nation, every leader, whether that's in business or in government, to actually be addressing it in a meaningful way, not in a way that is, kicking the can down the road, as we've seen so often with this issue. We knew back in 1990 when, which was that Paris Agreement, 1990, I think it was, that this was something that we were going to have to act as a global community to address. We are 34 years away from that now, and we still really, although a lot of progress has been made and a lot of people working in that space are optimistic, and we have a lot of technologies that I think will help us, like AI, and I saw a presentation recently about AIs that are going to help to identify enzymes that can help break down plastic and water pollution. But the fundamental truth is, if we don't have biodiversity and we don't have and sea temperatures rise and oceans acidify, we're not going to be around much longer. But that's a negative ending. I'm going to be a positive technologist and say that we do have the skills, we have the ability, human beings are remarkable. Look at, COVID and how the world community responded to COVID and how governments largely did keep people safe. I mean, there was enormous loss of life, which was obviously incredibly tragic, but fundamentally technology in the form of the mRNA vaccine really did prove something that to be an incredible new novel discovery, and that helped us come out and live our lives in the way that we had done. So technology can hopefully come up with an answer to this big problem we face.
Optimistic and very hopeful indeed. I had a great time listening to you, Greg Williams, Editor-in-Chief of Wired. Thank you so much for your illuminating insights.
Peter, thank you so much for having me.
Ik bedank Greg Williams, hoofdredacteur van Wired, en ik dank ook u, luisteraar, dat u bij Business Radio was. Graag tot de volgende keer.